Hi everyone, so in this video I want to go over simplifying radical expressions because we didn't get to cover these in class today. So remember to have your chart of perfect squares available from last week. You really need to know your perfect squares and be able to recognize them. And that's going to really help with solving the problems we're doing in this chapter and what we're doing next week. So what is a radical expression? So a radical expression, remember, is anything with a radical sign. And one form of radicals are square roots. So the square root of 3x squared plus 4 is a radical expression. So is the square root of 45. The cubed root of 75x, that has a different index. It's not a square root, but that's also considered a radical expression. So we can simplify radical expressions. So here we're given the square root of 32 and we're asked to simplify it. So 32, as you know, if you look down the list, it's not a perfect square. So we can't just take the square root and then have a number in place of the square root of 32. But what you can do is you can pull out perfect squares or cubes or whatever you have depending on the radical. Here we're working with square roots, so we're going to see if there's any perfect squares that'll evenly divide 32. This is kind of like finding the GCF in some ways. So you're going to ask yourself, what is the biggest perfect square that's going to evenly divide 32? And what you do is you go down this list. 1, 4, 9, 16, 25. You want to see which is the largest perfect square that'll evenly divide 32. So the biggest perfect square that will do this is 16. Okay? 4 can divide 32, but it's not the biggest perfect square. The biggest one is 16, so we're going to write this as the square root of 16 times the square root of 2. Okay, so what I've done is I've written 32 as the product of two square roots. So what happens when I do this is the square root of 16, now I have a perfect square. The square root of 16 is 4, so I can write this as 4 times the square root of 2. And that is how you simplify radical expressions. Okay, so let's look at the square root of 75. So on the right side here, I have my list of perfect squares. So if I look at the square root of 75, the biggest perfect square that'll evenly divide 75 is 25. So that'll be the square root of 25 times the square root of 3. Okay, because 25 times 3 is 75. So the square root of 25 is 5, so I'm going to write that as 5 times the square root of 3. Now let's look at the square root of 80. And remember, if you are having trouble dividing these, don't forget to use your calculator. Just go through and do 80 divided by 4, 80 divided by 9, and see which one is the biggest perfect square that'll divide 80. And when you do this, you'll find that it's the square root of 16. So I can write this as the square root of 16 times the square root of 5. The square root of 16 is 4, so this becomes 4 times the square root of 5. So what happens if we have a number that's already in front? So here this 3 has already been factored out. So what you do is you write this as 3, and then we're going to look at the 24 and work on simplifying that. So when you try to simplify 24, that can be written as the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. Okay, so then we have 3, and the thing to remember here is that this is all being multiplied together. So it's like 3 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. So the square root of 4 is 2. So this is 3 times 2 times the square root of 6, which gives me 6 times the square root of 6. So all I've really done here is when I've pulled out the numbers in front, I've just gone ahead and multiplied them. Okay, because remember, we can combine numbers that are outside the square root, but we can't combine numbers that are outside and numbers that are inside. Okay, so similarly, let's do 3 times the square root of 72. So this will be 3 times, and the biggest perfect square that divides 72 is 36. So 3 times the square root of 36 times the square root of 2. So this will be 3 times 6 times the square root of 2, which gives me 18 square roots of 2. Okay, so let's look at this practice question here. So what expression is equivalent to the square root of 184? Okay, so we want to go through this list and see which is the biggest perfect square that'll evenly divide 184. So when you do this, you'll find that 4 is the biggest perfect square that will do so. So you'll have the square root of 4 times the square root of 46. The square root of 4 reduces to 2, so this will be 2 times the square root of 46, which is answer choice B. So now we have another one with a coefficient in front. So which expression is equivalent to 4 times the square root of 147? So let's think about rewriting the square root of 147. If you go through the list, the biggest perfect square that'll evenly divide 147 is 49. So this is 4 times the square root of 49 times the square root of 3. The square root of 49 is 7, so it's 4 times 7 times the square root of 3. 4 times 7 is 28, so it's 28 times the square root of 3.